graduated, elevated. Now it's my time to shine. Yeah, let's go. Major moves, power moves. Take it to the top one time, non-stop.
Hello and welcome to PhD Hard Talk. My name is Noma Mguni and I am the host of PhD Hard Talk. Professor Steve, could you please introduce yourself in terms of who you are, what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Oh, hello, Noma. My name's Steve Eichhorn. I'm a Professor of Material Science and Engineering at the University of Bristol. I work on cellulosic materials, so I work on natural materials from plants. And I've been supervising PhD students now for nearly 30 years.
Wow.
So I've been in the game for quite a long time. I've been at Bristol now for 7 years. Prior to that, I was at the University of Exeter. And then prior to that, I was at the University of Manchester. And I'm from Manchester originally. So.
Oh, lovely. I do love Manchester though. The rain is a bit too much.
Yes, it does rain quite a lot. Yeah.
It does. So today's discussion, really, we're going to focus on diversity, equity and inclusion. And we will have some questions as well that relate to PhDs, as you've mentioned, that you've supervised a lot of us, put myself in there. So in terms of the first question then, in your opinion, how does diversity, equity and inclusion in academia create barriers for promotion for women and men?
Oh, okay, right. So if you think of the sort of the university research base, and you look at the pure statistics of different groups within the that space, and I guess we're talking specifically here, maybe about PhD students. Are you talking about and researchers at different levels? And the progression between the different levels, it's very clear from the data that women, and if you have intersectionality between that, women of colour, particularly black women, are very marginalised within the system compared to white counterparts. But that's also below the levels that you would expect to see in our current population. So when it gets into higher education, you look at the data in higher education, for instance, less than 1% of the academy, when we talk about the academy in this country, we tend to mean people like myself, who are full-time academic staff. Less than 1% are black, for instance. And then if you look at black women, they're extremely marginalised within the UK. There are fewer than 100 black female professors, for instance, in the UK. And so, how does equity, diversity, and inclusion relate to promotion? Was the question. Well, if you look at the progression between the different levels, then it's quite clear there are drop-offs. So, for instance, we know in the chemical sciences that the drop-off for black PhD students moving on to postdocs is quite dramatic. There is a lack of progression from that stage to the next stage. And then, of course, if you're going from postdoc, that's if you like the sort of waiting room for someone to go into a full-time academic position. And in that case, then the drop-off's even more. So there's this sort of pipeline issue that people from marginalised groups are being put off or discriminated against during that progression period. So equity, diversity, and inclusion looks at trying to put things in place to ensure that doesn't happen.
So I have a different perspective when it comes to diversity, equity and inclusion, which is, I feel like BAME groups, to put it that way, they are boxed even more. Yes. And it makes them tokens in certain, we'll say, institutions or businesses, essentially. So therefore you will have maybe 2 out of the 50 that will be in senior positions to say, yes, we've ticked that box. Do you think that is an accurate representation, or I am shooting off into the stars?
No, you're not at all. And you see, the problem is people tend to just focus on the numbers, and then they will just try and put things in place to improve the numbers. But actually, what really needs to happen is the culture needs to change, the actual place into which people are working, and the inclusion part of it is key. I mean, people often use this analogy for inclusion, but I'll use it here. You can invite people to the dance, but unless you allow them to dance how they want to dance, then that's not inclusion. So we need workplaces, we need spaces within higher education where people are allowed to be their authentic selves. And everybody's an individual. But actually, when you look at the way in which the culture of academia has developed, it's very exclusive. It has certain ways of doing things, and it doesn't allow for that diversity to flourish and speak its voice, if you like, in a way that it's intended. So it's absolutely key that the I is included in the ED and I. It's not just about increasing numbers and, as you say, ticking boxes. That's not going to work at all. We'll just put people into toxic environments and they won't flourish.
So just to follow on that, from what you've just said, so I wrote this down earlier, which is it whom you know or what you know in terms of social networks? And you've just briefly touched on it. We were going to discuss it later. We might as well discuss it now.
I think people often don't really appreciate the who you know in academia, and it's not just the sort of like formal networks that are there, it's the informal ones. And it's having people that will speak for you when you're not in the room. I think that plays a big role in terms of people's progression. And we have formal processes for promotion in universities, but then there are those informal things that happen during that process that actually play quite a big role. Now, people will say, well, we need to get rid of those, but actually I just think we need to be aware that they work well for some people and not others. And I think it's really important that I've been asked, as a mentor, to speak for people, who feel marginalised within the organisations that I've worked in, when they're not in the room, to sort of champion them, if you like. And I think that's really key. So I think that it's who you know is really, really important. Obviously, what you know is important, but then who gets to decide whether that knowledge is valuable or not, and what forms of knowledge are valuable. And then we get into a discussion really about the different types of knowledge and how they've been developed, and people come to that knowledge in different ways, and they express it in different ways. And I think it's key to remember that type of diversity too as well.
And in terms of the next question is basically within diversity and inclusion, we have women and we have males. So I've also had interactions where we'll say BAME males have felt like they are less than their Caucasian counterparts. Would you say that is something that is there, or it's just based on the environment in terms of which you're in?
Well, I mean, I think it very much. I mean, in the broad sort of picture of things, yes, I would say that is probably true. But then it just does actually depend on your local environment and the culture into which in which you're working. And I think there are other indicators too, socioeconomic class and all those things play a role too. but I think in a sort of broad sense, yes, I do think that men of colour are discriminated against in ways that their white counterparts aren't, and the obvious thing is racism. It's not. It's clear that it works. The way in which racism works, as far as I understand it, it is a structural system. So someone like me, perhaps hardly ever gets to sort of have to think about why they're white, or goes into a situation where they would sort of recognize their own racial identity. So I can't think of many, if any, situations where that's been the case. And more to the point, where it's actually even affected my day-to-day working within academia. Nobody's come to me and immediately noticed I'm white, and on the basis of that made some assumption about whether I'm capable of doing the job, whether I'm whether I'm at the right time in my career to do something, whether I'm the right fit for a particular role. Whether, I mean, even more so, it's if I've ever come short in terms of my academic performance, I can point to times in my career where I've been given a chance, where I was given an opportunity in spite of the fact that I perhaps hadn't quite reached the levels that I ought to have done. Now, would that have happened if I wasn't white? And I have to sort of ask the question, is that the case? So I think it works in very complex ways, and it works in what I would call positive discrimination, as in in the cases I've pointed out, where I personally feel I've been given opportunities, and I have to reflect on that and think, well, would it have happened if I wasn't white?
That's really interesting. So, with positive racism, as you've mentioned, it is a thing that I think as BAME or brown people, we are all aware of. And also at the same time, we know our limitations, but we're always scared of being labeled as the angry brown person, essentially, if we voice our opinions and if we challenge, the status quo. And in your opinion, how do we then navigate through that maze? Like you said, it's very complex, and the social networks, whether formal or informal, they play a huge part. And if you're not likable, or you don't fit the face, as I would call it, essentially you don't get into the club. So how do we navigate through that, knowing that we've got policies and procedures in place, but we've also got people, and people are people?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can only point to sort of advice that I've heard. So just last week on Friday was at the Society of Black Academics conference, the annual conference, and the suggestions there were get a mentor, get somebody who's prepared to sort of stand alongside you and make that intervention on your behalf, because often that's going to be with somebody that would be considered to be sort of more senior than you in the university. So, for instance, I'll point to an example in my career where that happened. I went for promotion when I was quite young, and my boss wasn't very receptive to it at the time. But then I had somebody, who used to work with me on that, and he went down to talk to that person, saying, "No, I think you're wrong. I think he is ready for it." So you need that type of intervention, often to sort of navigate the system. But I think it's important that you should be able to express your your dissatisfaction with what's happening. But are we there yet in UK higher education? I'm not sure we are. We need systems and structures that enable that voice to be heard, and collective action is often pretty good. I think if there's a group of you that are prepared to sort of come forward, it often works better in that sense. But I do think having mentors and someone that will champion is probably the best way to do things.
So then I want to be cheeky and ask this question. Do I then get a mentor who's Caucasian and who's male to fight for me?
Well, I mean, a mentor is just somebody who's prepared to do that for you, an ally, and it's not necessarily true that somebody that looks like you, not that everybody looks like you, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Somebody that might know what you're going through. It's not necessarily the case that they would do that. So I don't think it really matters, just as long as they're prepared to stand in your corner. And I think, it does help, I'm sure, to have someone that looks like you. I hate to use that expression because not everybody looks the same, right?
Yeah.
But do you know what I mean? Who would understand what some of what you're going through, but it's not necessarily the case. I think as long as you have somebody that's prepared to understand themselves what it might be that you're going through. So in that case, it could be a white person who does, has taken some time to understand what the barriers are and how that manifests itself in your particular situation. Then yeah, why not?
So
they might get listened to. They may get listened to more as well. That's the other thing in the sad structure of racism. That's possibly the case. Yeah.
No, that's what I was thinking as well. Hence why I've asked the question to say, if they're already in the group, then their voice is heard already. They don't have to say as much. If I was to get another brown person, would they be heard?
Not always. Depends. But I think it's I think you've got to have someone that you feel comfortable with, and that will have you back. It may not necessarily be the case, but I think it's in the if you think of an organization as having structural or systemic racism present in it, then it's likely that that's going to be the case. Yeah.
So the next question that I have is, PhDs, DBAs, like you said before, you get to the postdoc if you want to go down that route, or you're already teaching, so you have options essentially. What do they need to think about before they get into academia? Because I interviewed somebody. He was ready to go. He was over it. He said the red tape is too much, the politics, asking when we know what the answer is, why do I have to do that? And I said, well, I've worked in industry, it's the same, love. I don't think it's that different, but I've never worked in academia. So in your opinion, what do we need to think about before we embark on the journey of being in academia and having to publish and having to teach, The
big one for me, and the one that we very rarely talk about, is failure. You have to learn to deal with failure, because if you're applying for grants, that's funding. If you're writing papers, it's the success rates often for certainly grants, very, very low. At best, we're talking about 30% success rate. So you're bound to experience failure more than you'll experience success, and I think that's the piece that we have to emphasize to people when they go into academia, is that they've got to get some idea of how they're going to deal with that when they encounter it, and what they're going to do with it. How they're going to bounce back from it. Whether if you apply for a grant, don't think that grant's over. You can apply somewhere else with the same idea, or rehash your grant in a different way and put it forward again. Just not give up on yourself, really, and the ideas that you've generated. So I think that's one. I also think that academia is very stressful. So I am told that the mental health of academics will be on a par with people that work in a few years, will be on a par with people that work in, say, the health sector, so people who are working in hospitals, and, it's that sort of level, because the pressures of academia are quite strong, we have a discussion about mental health, and in the conference last week, and and I think you need to sort of think about those things. But let's talk about the positives. I mean, it's a very privileged position to be in. You get to do amazing things. You get to work with lots of different people. You get to cultivate your own ideas. You get to, if one of the things about my job is that I get to decide largely what I do. I can do more research, I can do more teaching, I can travel, I can go and go to international conferences. There are different pieces to the job that you can build up. You could start up your own company, you become an entrepreneur in that sense. Or you can go down the sort of administrative route. You could decide that you enjoy managing people, so you could become a head of department, a dean, even a vice chancellor. If you really wanted to. In fact, I've heard vice chancellors say that they very early on had a dream to become a vice chancellor. So you could even pursue that if you wanted to. But again, you have to sort of be prepared for failure, because the higher up you go, the fewer the jobs there are, for those positions. So it's, again, I think you've got to sort of have some expectation that somewhere along the line you're going to meet hurdles, and that's whoever you are. Now, if you're from a marginalised group, it's pretty clear that progression is going to be more difficult. So you have to be prepared for that, I think, as well. And this is why you need the support of people around you. The other, sorry to go on a bit about
this, no, it's all right.
The final thing that I think people don't really anticipate is that, they'll get into their academic career and they'll suddenly realise that they don't have anything else, that they're spending all their time doing the job, and actually, they don't have interests outside of work. They don't have, they may have neglected family. They may have done all sorts of, they may have neglected their health, to the expense of the job. And actually, those things are the most important things. Health first. Family is really important, but having interests outside of work is really important. So I don't think we prepare people for that and say, well, actually, if you're going to go into this, make sure you've got healthy life outside of work. Don't make it everything that you do. Otherwise, it's really going to be difficult, because you won't be able to revitalize yourself, and you will fall over at some point if you do that.